Hello and welcome back to the Handstandcast with me, Emmet Lewis, and my co-host Mikael Christy Hansen. How are things going, Mikael?
They are rolling about as normal. Same shit, different day. Can't complain, etc.
Same shit, different year. We're like, I don't know. We're on that anniversary of getting locked down in Ireland for Rona yesterday, I think. And it's actually St. Patrick's Day today. We're recording, so it's Irish national holiday. So I've had a request to make up some Irish history, which I'll do at some point in the podcast. I'm sure I can come up with something. But anyway, so 16th of March last year was when we got locked down. We've basically been in perpetual lockdown ever since. So happy birthday, Rona, I suppose.
Yay.
Yeah.
Yeah, but quite normal. Standing on hands occasionally. Don't really do much more than that. Some paper folding, staring into the void.
Staring into the void. The void is always fun to stare into, I find. So calming.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of the model thing you just showed me, unfortunately, it's not a video podcast because we could show off your model, but Mikael is just engaged in King Ghidorah from thing. From what?
King Ghidorah is... Yes, it's from... Ghidorah. I can't remember which movie he was first shown. He looked like shit in those movies, and the paper model looks a lot better.
But that's the thing, like the old Godzilla movies, they all just look like shit. And that's what made them amazing.
Yeah, they really did. But me and my friend that I watch garbage movies with, we are going to do kind of a Godzilla-thon at one point. We haven't really gotten around to that. But I think one of the Godzilla movies has my favorite title of any movie ever. It is Godzilla, Mothra, and King Ghidorah, Giant Monsters All Out Attack. That is the entire title of the movie, and I think that is absolutely fascinating. But anyway, Ghidorah is basically a giant dragon with 3 heads and huge wings and stuff, and I've been folding on it for coming up in a month, I think. And it's extremely overwhelming because there's so much to do on it, so I've just been chipping away at it a little bit here and a little bit there. But I think it's going to turn out pretty well. I think
you're doing pretty good for a month, if that's all you've been working on it.
Yeah, but I mean, there's not that much to do on it compared to some of the other types of models, but it's there's a lot of figuring out because I have no reference of what to do with anything. And I redesigned a couple of parts to make the wings larger and blah, blah, blah. So it's an enormous project, but very fun and frustrating, as always.
That's cool. 2 things. I think one, you should just start doing watch parties for your trash movies with your friend. Just stream them online and comment on them while you're doing them.
Yeah, but that's basically what we're doing. We're watching them on Discord now, and he was actually talking about starting a group of getting more people involved with watching garbage movies. Maybe we can do a thing with that. The only thing is everyone's haha, yeah, let's watch garbage movies that are so bad that they're good. You have no idea what you're getting into. That is the problem. 2 of our friends were yeah, we're gonna join, and they join, and it's on Discord, and 10 minutes pass and they're gone, and I'm I knew it. These weak souls. I said it to my friend, yeah, we're gonna have a lot of people joining in, and they're all gonna have fun and laugh. But when we start watching actually bad movies, they're all gonna drop off.
Yeah, I think it's that thing. People think, they hear trash movies and they think The Room. Now imagine movies that would make The Room. I've tried to watch a few of these. I've got partway through some of them. So try to imagine movies that make The Room look pretty awesome. The Room is a stellar masterpiece compared to some of these.
Yeah, but at least The Room had a budget of some sort. I mean, there's lack of talent on every corner, but I mean, some of this shit is just, it's so awful. Like yesterday we watched the films of Nanny Lynn, which apparently it's some obscure VHS tape that got copied by someone, and it's very unsure how it made it into the public, because apparently it's some old lady that made it for her grandchildren, and it's an animated movie made on Amiga of all things, and the animation is absolutely trashed here. And the storylines, they make no sense, and they're not for children. It's terrifying, some of the shit. There's a little mutant monster boy created from antibiotics, they say, and he dissolves when he gets into water, and then they make a waterproof version of him that turns into a lizard, that turns into a cat, that grows so large it walks around the entire it walks across the earth in just a few steps because it's so large. And then like the scientist makes a rocket with antibiotics that it shoots into the cat's ass so that it reduces in size again. And then he becomes friend with a cockroach that dies. And then he eats the cockroach friend. And then he starts to cry because he ate his friend. It's fucked up.
Sounds kind of like one of those kid stories. They probably had like the kid was making a thing. It's like, we have a cat, and what happened? And then a wolf, and then an antibiotic, and then an antibiotic took care of the biotic.
It certainly sounds like that, but like, who the hell makes this shit for their grandkids? Yeah. It's amazing.
Awesome.
However, we have a topic today, don't we?
Do we? Do we ever have a topic? Yeah. So today we are talking about hands, hands as feet, the handstand. So I think we're just gonna cover. It's one of the things, we got a lot of questions. We got some questions at the end, some longer questions, but we get asked that either to our own clients and everyone else, like, what do I do with my hands? How wide? What grip should I use? What grip should I use on blocks? How wide should I place my hands? Finger stretching, finger strength, all these kind of things. We're going to sort of delve into this today and get it rolling. So, yes. Hands. I suppose the most fundamental thing people want to know is, how wide should your hands be on the floor to start with?
Yeah, I think it's. I mean, the first thing I'd like to say about hands and handstand is that, like, your hands are a pair of shitty feet. That's what they are, basically. They're feet that suck to do their job, comparatively speaking. But like the job they should do is pretty much the same. Like when you stand on your feet, you keep the weight more or less in the center of the foot. But again, the foot is pretty good, hands pretty shit, and the foot is constructed to stand on, so it'll be better. But like the toes will help you to not fall forwards if you move the weight too much there, and so on. Same as fingers. But width, yeah, like I mean, it depends a bit. That's like, I guess that's like our entire what's it called? Punchline of all these podcasts. It depends a bit, but like in relation to what you want to do, like the general shoulder width is quite a safe bet because it works for a very large number of things, and it's kind of like, and there's a reason for it becoming a type of default because like it's the most intuitive thing to do. Okay, I'm going to put my hands on the floor. I'm just going to put them more or less right down, but a slight width compared to the shoulder width might also be useful. And like I've seen that in kind of the completely untrained, intuitive handstand that you see children try, or kind of anyone that has no idea what they're doing. They have a tendency to turn the hands a little bit out and put the hands maybe a little bit wider, and sometimes then bend the arms slightly, which all makes sense because like the body is just trying to figure out a way to do this, and that might seem like the most sensible way because the body has some sort of understanding of carrying weight with slightly wider arms than normal and a little bit of bend in the arms, for example.
Yeah, it's definitely like the width question. It's one of these weird things you encounter a lot. I'm trying to remember what this was. Maybe it was when I was in Circle Media or other stuff, where one of the coaches we had for a very short time was very adamant that your hands must be 33 centimeters apart at all times. This is it. 33 centimeters was his magic number. And it finally came down, like this was for everything. Gymnastics, acrobatics. He was an acrobatics coach, but also taught a bit of handstands thing. And he also taught more advanced handstands. And it came down, the reason why it was 33 centimeters apart was because the cane spacing was 33 centimeters apart. So everyone had to do this. Whereas 33 centimeters for me was kind of narrow. For some of the smaller girls who were like 150 centimeters, was kind of wide. And you do see this kind of like on width spacing, particularly on canes and say smaller people, like 150, 155. The canes like make their handstands wide. And say if we're to look at say Pavel Stankovic as an example of someone who is immensely good, but he balances his two arms quite a wide hand position. If you look, you would see that his hands are actually outside his shoulders a lot of the time. So when he transfers to one arm, he has to make quite a big horizontal transfer of the weight as much as the vertical displacement you would have for the one arm. So it's kind of interesting, but clearly, like, I'm just pulling Pavel up because he's a machine. So clearly it works. And clearly no one has told him that his handstand is too wide and he should use a narrower grip at some point, or he's found what has worked for him. So it is just interesting that different things different things will work and different spacings will work and different things will feel better for you. But I think there is some generalities. Like, it is kind of generally, it's that kind of thing as well. Like, you do see people, what we're looking for more so than anything else, I suppose, is placing the weight roughly the center of the hand or the convergent center of the hand. So generally this will mean, like, when you're doing a 2-arm handstand, the weight will be slightly shifted towards the thumbs because it will converge in these points. And if you're doing a 1-arm, it's going to be slightly shifted towards the middle finger. Not a lot, but this will give you a rough idea. If you are pushing your hands too narrow, you'll feel the weight will actually have a tendency to go more towards the outside of the hand. And, you know, we can just think of, like, say, putting the hands together in a handstand. It makes a kind of bow shape to the upper arms, or one arm is straight and one arm is bowed. At the same point, if your arms are too wide, it's actually hard to maintain a handstand. So if we think of, like, we have a handstand spacing that is everything from hands crossed to hands basically about 2 times the arm's distance, aka a Japanese handstand width. And within that sort of space, there's somewhere you will find comfortable.
Yeah. Yeah, like I think that, like, everything that's, like, has very narrow hands in terms of either cross hands even, or like hand on hand, or kind of like a diamond grip, kind of fingers crossing and so on. Like, those will, for most people, be a bit harder than a normal handstand, because like you are reducing the base of support of your body. You will have less space to move on, and you will start experiencing more like sideways shifting, which you won't really in a wider base. So the narrower the hands are, the more challenging the sideways becomes. And past a certain level, the wider they are, I mean, if you go into Japanese handstand territory, then the forwards and backwards balance will actually start becoming substantially harder, because, like, your base of support is it's a long strip that your weight is distributed along, and it becomes kind of a lot tougher to keep yourself above there. So when you do, like, a very wide Japanese handstand, for example, it's on the way up. It can be tough to get there because you cannot block kind of the forwards motion as much. And, like, with that kind of a very wide handstand, like, it's tough to turn your fingers a lot forwards. So, like, the thumb will maybe be more forwards when you're very wide, and that makes it harder to apply pressure, since you might just have your thumb and your index finger and so on.
Yeah, I always found
facing forward.
Japanese handstands are a bit more like handstands on straps and rings to balance.
They are.
Yeah, I always found it that way. It's just like, oh, my hands are out here. Like, I haven't actually done a Japanese handstand in years. I can't even remember the last one. But when I would do them, we'd be doing them, like fingers pointing out to the side, and then the balance would be more in the shoulders, and I wouldn't really be using the hands. So it is a bit more. You do see this in, like, gymnastics and stuff like that when people do them on the floor. You see them, they will tend to actually arch through the chest a bit more and not be as hollow as they might.
Yeah, it's a little bit in the same way as you see. I mean, it's maybe a strange comparison. No, it's not a strange comparison, actually, but if you look at when gymnasts do an inverted cross and rings, it's very few that are kind of keep a hollow chest. Most of the time, they kind of have a little bit of an arch in the upper back, or I mean, at least a lot of them, unless their inverted cross is perfect, they'll have, like, and I guess that is to allow the pecs to do a little bit of work and so on. And, like, I can not relate to that in terms of an inverted cross, but I can definitely do that in terms of a Japanese handstand, because that little chest out things allows you a little bit of an easier time to balance. And by the way, if you want to see the perfect inverted cross, check out, what's his name? Dong Chen. He's a Chinese gymnast that there are some clips of him doing. He does, like, both forwards and backwards swing directly into an absolutely perfect iron cross, like, twice in his routine. It looks bonkers. The line through his, like, hand, his arms and his chest is just ridiculously good.
Yeah.
However, like, I mean, if you kind of move towards the more, how to say, the general handstand, or what is kind of looked upon more as the normal esque hand placements, like somewhere around shoulder width, where you can have it slightly wider, slightly narrower. like my preferred positioning when I'm going to do a one arm, for example, when I kick up to my regular handstand, like it is most of the time with the intention to go to one arm, and I will tend to place my hands a little bit narrower than shoulders, because it's going to be a shorter travel distance for my body as I'm going to tilt my hips and kind of push the shoulder and so on. Yeah. So it's not super narrow, but it's slightly narrower than normal. And I've had people comment on this when they've seen my hands and say, "Oh yeah, your hands are quite narrow compared to your shoulders." And it's something that I didn't really notice. Whereas if I'm going to do, like if I do a handstand in any kind of breakdancing, breaking related context, it'll very often be wide, because I'm going to be using a bent arm stuff in it. Like I might want to drop down to a baby freeze or whatever. And then like just having that wide positioning allows you for more options.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those things. I think it's not so much that there should be a set distance for where your hand should be in a handstand. You should be able to hold a handstand once you get past kind of beginner level, whatever it is. You should be able to hold a handstand with multiple hand spacings and just not have too much of a challenge to your balance, because different things are like useful for different positions. It's kind of like as you're going on, like I hold my hands narrower because my intent after I get into a handstand is to move to a one-arm handstand, so I don't want to have that horizontal translation of the body over onto the stack when it's basically done by tilting my hips and then I'm there. And it is kind of like, it is one of those things, like now to say with Mikael, you have quite wide shoulders, like even just a bone spacing compared to your height. You're quite like, I don't know, Pythonic or triagonal in your shaping. So that kind of interesting, like it does look when you put your hands down that they are too narrow. If I was to fixate on a shoulder landmark, clearly you're doing this. And I've seen this with like other balancers. Like this is the kind of thing is like if we're using anatomical landmarks of the shoulders and saying, oh, it should be here and it should be there, then maybe it doesn't have to be. It's more down to comfort and control.
Yeah.
It is like, it's one of these things as well, like it, depending on what you're doing, like pressing, I keep my hands slightly wider when I press. I can press with my hands narrow when I need to, but it's when I'm going to do wrap them out, I'll take them slightly wider. If I'm doing handstand push-up, like generally with handstand push-up, we're telling people to go wider on the shoulders, because it means there's going to be, when you externally rotate the shoulders and lock them into position, there's less, if you look at the effective leverage from if you project, or like if you break down your triangle into right angles, do convergent right angles, or cause of the angle and side of the angle, whatever it is. Helgi, fix me. Anyway, you'll see that the leverage gets reduced, and it is kind of making it easier. But then at the same time, that lower position, like if I was to use my normal handstand position when doing a handstand push-up, when I come down, it's incredibly uncomfortable because my upper arms will contact my body. If I take a wider stance, then as my body will come through, my upper arms have a bit of space to move through them, so I can go full range of motion. Yeah.
It is good to be able to do handstand push-ups with narrow arms, but it's a weird one, because it just depends on how you're comfortable. Like, because it's easy to start to again just try to make an absolute out of this vocabulary, and like, yeah, you need to be able, like, this is exactly the handstand position or for a push-up and so on. But in general, I see the handstand push-up, it's a strength move, and it is one that most people do with slightly wider arms, and it is certainly more comfortable there. Doing with narrow arms is possible. It's heavier on the triceps, I find, and it's tougher to keep like a very tight body position doing it. Possible, but harder. And then like the argument might go, oh yeah, but then that's proper because it's harder. Yeah, but you could also just say that, oh yeah, but like a diamond handstand push-up is even harder. Is that more proper because it's harder, or is it just because we have this fixated idea that, oh yeah, this must be correct due to the architecture it seemingly creates, and then we adhere to that because of that? It's up to you.
That's kind of interesting one. It's like, yes, handstand push-up is harder. No one really sells the old reverse grip handstand push-up as the ultimate handstand push-up. So that's with hands pointing backwards.
Well, yeah, that's very hard.
Yeah, it's a beast of a one, but no one really goes, you should do it that way, because that is basically the hardest one. Or narrow grip reverse handstand
Yeah,
push-up.
exactly. And you could go on like this forever, and then it in the end comes down to the federation again. With like we've dictated that these parameters are the quote unquote standard ones, and hence that should act as always the standard. And it's like, again, like if we just look at what are practical for different purposes. Again, nice to look at what they do in gymnastics. Again, I'm not an expert on gymnastics, but these are based on observations. Like when you see when they often do on floor routines, they do a press to handstand or like similar skills. They do often tend to have a slightly different or like wider hand positions, I've noticed, particularly in floor exercise, the men's floor exercise, they do that. And it leads me to, and also like I would assume it's also in gymnastics related to the width of the parallel bars.
Yeah, I was just going to say that.
Is there like because there must be a standard measure for the width of the bars.
Yeah, if I remember, there's not a standard measure, but there's a body measurement. So you can set the bars, because the bars can move in and out. And generally, if I remember off the top of my head, it's shoulder width plus one fist and two fingers is the recommended spacing they use for that. Because if you think about it, if I was using a shoulder width grip on a set of parallel bars and go to swing down through them, or go into basket or anything, you just get trashed. So you need some space to move between them. Yeah. So that's generally like, once again, it's function, and what are you going to do with your handstand is dictating the space, and what are you going to do your handstand on. Yeah, it's kind of like, I've actually narrowed my grip recently now that I've been training again in the new house. The reason I've narrowed the grip is because our floorboards are a certain space, and it annoys me to have my little fingers on the gap between the floorboards, even though it's like pressed together. So I brought my grip in consciously just to not be annoyed by having little fingers on a little crack. So it is kind of, are you irritated by your floor? Move your hands in. But it's
like that thing with the parallel bars. It's like if we look at then I guess at least men's gymnastics as a whole, the likelihood that you will do some parallel bar work and handstand on parallel bar is quite high likelihood that you do that if you're doing gymnastics over many years, which means that this will be a positioning that you'll get used to, and something that you might then carry over to the floor and use in other contexts. On rings as well, it's slightly wider than shoulders because they turn the rings out and so on, and lean it into the biceps, and that will have a significant carryover for the purpose of the training of the handstand. And I think that like these things will start factoring in onto the discipline as a whole. Also, like in gymnastics, you will use stuff like the handstand push-up or the planche as elements where you get points for. Yeah. So both of which might be, at least for many, more comfortable with a slightly wider grip. So I think that these things start to feed into each other. And also gymnastics-wise, if you're doing round-offs, for example, I'm no expert on round-offs, but like it's rare to see someone wanting to set up their round-off with a very narrow grip. Like I was watching some like breakdowns, like slow motion of, I don't know if it was that Japanese guy. What's his name? Not Uchimura, but there's a guy that he did 4.5 twists and stuff to punch to half twist. Is fucking ridiculous twister. But it was something like he does a round off, and it's so wide that like his head is like close to the floor because he's going to transfer so much power through it. And it's just fascinating to see. And in these kind of contexts, you might also just be like being used to at least this kind of wide positioning of the hands might be useful.
Yeah, I can remember we had a coach who was a
Kenzo Shirai is his name.
That's cool. We had a coach on, what you call him, who's a Cuban gymnastics coach who was part of had been working at their Olympic Center. And Cubans are generally pretty good at these things for such a small nation. We had our normal sort of circus people going through it who like, you must be completely arm straight and you must be narrow waist for a lot of our tumbling stuff. And it was fine. And then he came along and goes, what are you talking about? Take your hands wider. Okay, get ready to bend your arms. And we're like, but it doesn't look like that. And then he actually took his time to find, this is, early days of YouTube, find some videos of people tumbling, and it was freeze framing all these Olympic gymnasts. And I'm going, look, Their arms are bending under the load. It's only split second. Their arms are bending, and then they're punching. Their arms are bending. So, after a bit of argument, you change the technique, and like the height I was getting out of things coming off this after changing to that technique. So it is kind of, you do, things when they're moving fast are not what you think you see. So you need to actually watch them either on split screen or slow motion, and then you'll see what's going on. Anyway, that's tumbling. Anyway, we're getting off topic. So, yeah.
Other things, hands.
Yeah, definitive grip and how wit is basically find what works for you and try a lot of them. It's even one of these things. I've done this back in the day. Now, it is a bit pedantic, but I drew a line on my floor. I had a line, I actually painted it on the floor in the place I was living, and measured it out in centimeters so I could exactly place my fingers. I want them this wide and I want them that wide. Possibly a bit over the top, but definitely worth going, because then I had the canes are spaced this wide, so I want to place my hands that wide, but I prefer this on parallettes for handstand. Anyway, so you could do that, but you don't have to.
Yeah, and then if we move down from kind of shoulder position, also it's just hand position itself that is a huge question, and that is often brought up, and we've discussed it before, and where the fingers should face and something and stuff like that. And this is there's loads of variation. This is I think that I think one of the things one of the principles that we've operated with for a long time is just looking for the parameters which are constant and the parameters which aren't. And let us just be extremely dumb and definitive. One parameter that will always be present if you handstand is that the muscles of your arms are to some degree tensing. Yeah. Because if they aren't, you are going you are not doing a handstand. This is 100% constant. Whereas with a hand position, it's easy to say that your hands must be like this. But then if you can find examples on amateur, mid, and high level practitioners that do otherwise, and particularly when they're mid to high level and they do otherwise, you can no longer call it an axiom and say that it's a definitive thing, because if people are doing it differently, it must be a variation of the various things that are possible rather than one that is particularly important. And now there might be nuances within that as well, but I got surprised on how many strange hand positions I started seeing from really good people. And this is what I found cool. Things that I thought, this must be how you place your hand. And then someone suddenly comes to me and says, but your hand is placed inwards. I'm like, is it? I had no fucking idea. And then I look and it looks like my hand is inwards. Yeah. But I'm still pretty right.
Yeah, it is kind of interesting, that kind of thing where a lot of the more common advice you get and for a thing is fingers must point exactly forwards, or your index finger must point to 12 o'clock. And it's a good base for experimentation, but when you start looking, say yourself, you turn your hands inwards, so then it looks like if you're to project the line of your index fingers, they'd be pointing at each other instead of parallel. I can find probably an equal number of people who are just as good, possibly even better, who have their hand turned out slightly, so the thumb is almost pointing forward and the index finger is probably pointing to 1 or 11 o'clock. So it is just there is a range. I can even find people to turn out further than that. And there is just a range of things. And there was an interesting one on the story recently where we put up your hand grip and pointed it out that you turn your hands in. And then a lot of people who are training one arms tried it out and then got back and replied to us going oh my God, that just made everything feel so much better for me. I've been trying to always go this way, but this worked better. With sharing videos as well of going here, check it out. Here, I've increased my whole, these are people just starting one arm, but it was some person going oh look, I got 2 seconds really stable and it was much better than I've done before and it was very easy. So there is that's the kind of thing. It's a lot of what we encourage you to do is to experiment. Just don't make assumptions that there's the general case that fits a good 70-80% of the population, which is a good fit, but you do have to try what works for yourself.
Yeah. and I think hand position is one of the ones that are the most relative in this sense, because again, as we talked about before, like the anatomy of bones, of muscles, all this, like you cannot assume they're the same, because they aren't. And this is like a hard scientific fact. Look at a bunch of cadavers or bone pieces, and you'll see it.
How many cadavers have you got stashed? Check out my stash of cadavers.
I basically did the Da Vinci here, just like went and just got a bunch of corpses and cut them up to see how their acromion looked. Don't tell anyone. But like I remember, like, who was the first? Yeah, like a friend of mine from Finland. She was the first I saw that had this kind of extremely cupped hand position. That was 10 years ago. Like, basically, her hand looks like a little pyramid when she does a handstand. And she was training in the circus hall, and I was talking to her, and she's doing handstand. I'm like, "What the hell are you doing with your hand? Why aren't you doing like this?" And I showed her how I gripped, and she's like, "Oh, but look!" And she shows me, and she grips the floor, and her fingers just slip underneath her hand. I have no idea how this happens, but her fingers are also extremely bendy backwards. So for her, this it just wasn't a comfortable option. And her body's natural choice was to kind of have that extreme cupping of the hand, which it like basically looked like an Illuminati triangle, her entire hand. And she would kind of put her thumb underneath her fingers. And I mean, that's the same as Morgan does. And Morgan is a total fucking beast. And like that's what I find is funny when people come and tell you, "Oh yeah, but your entire palm must be touching the floor." But okay, but why isn't he? And why is he really fucking good?
It's the same. Like I would have constant wrist injury, constant wrist something, particularly when I was training much more full time, by keeping my index finger down, and then I changed to like just letting it come off the ground. And I just have I only have the knuckles in my grip now. I only have the knuckles of my little finger and index finger on the ground. And the other one can go up and down. If it goes down when I lose into overbalance, and then when I'm back into normal balance, it's off the ground. And that stopped all my wrist issues. Just like the little constant, I don't know, wrist inflammation. Not, I'm going to say tendonitis or anything, but it was just that. And it's even like I taught Morgan that grip, going like, "Why don't you try this out, see if it works?" And it works. And a lot of people who've tried it, it works. And then it's kind of like, it's also this kind of thing of like, if you think like, oh, if I want to have like a significant pressure through the first knuckle, what has to happen above the handstand to achieve that? Whereas if I'm placing myself vertically, now we can say on the kind of, if we project a plumb line through your feet and your shoulders are kind of the way we want, the arms are going to be slightly off that plumb line. The arms are going to be slightly diagonal, but the shoulders will be placed basically about the sweet spot on the wrist. And if you are actually going forward, and this is when people open out either lean forward too much and they're gripping the ground constantly, that constant gripping thing that intermediates get into, or your handstand is always too open and almost into a mild diagonal curve, you will have significant weight in the first knuckle all the time versus 90% of the weight into the sweet spot, close to the base of the thumb, that kind of zone of the wrist. And then the fingers are sort of relaxed but ready to move when they need to versus having constant pressure. And I think that kind of like the pyramid grip gets around that. It's one of those things I recommend to a lot of people to try nowadays just to see if it works.
Yeah, it's certainly a variable within the realm of possibilities that can be useful. So I think that it's important to look upon these variations as such. When it comes to the hands as well, like what I said in the beginning of the thing with the hands being a shitty foot, like it really is, and this is, I think it's one of the largest takeaways from understanding how the handstand is supposed to work. That like the better you get at it, the more it becomes like standing on your feet. Like it's very similar in the way you place your hands. It's just that, again, like the finger is like almost half the size of your hand, which means that you need to be using and pushing on the floor a lot more with your fingers than you would need with the toes, which are basically just like a few centimeters in the very front of your foot. And it's rare that you place your weight towards the toes. So you rarely get tired in your toes by standing on your feet because of you don't need to keep as constant pressure due to the distribution of the joint. And also, again, it's like the hand isn't constructed to be the main kind of locomotive part of our bodies in daily life, and we haven't walked on our hands for the entire life unless you're a child acrobat. And guess what? Like you find the child acrobats who've done this since they were kids, and they can do an hour of handstand, like because the joints are then taught this through their upbringing.
Yeah,
and I think that like it's very relevant to look upon the hand as like the metaphor of, or like the comparison with the foot isn't complete, but it's relevant in the terms of how it should more or less feel to balance on your hands. But the main difference is that like that twitching and that use of the fingers will be relevant even for the most advanced of hand balancers. If you stay up for a very long time, you will, like, your forearms will start to burn. Whereas if you stand on your feet for a very long time, you won't necessarily get super tired in your ankles and your calves because of constantly gripping the ground.
Yeah, I don't know. You will eventually, like.
Eventually, yes, totally.
Yeah. I do like
because you are
amount of qigong where it involves like standing on the spot for quite a long time. And I can tell you, like, some of the burning shit I've gone through in the legs and feet. Like, there's one of these things when you kind of push through a zone, the burning feet is a stage you go through while you're developing this strength, and it literally feels like your feet are burning. They've gotten so like oomphed up from like just working so long. So and it is like one of these things, like, just to segue onto the feet thing, like for people who work on their feet, if we think say bars or restaurants, they have a thing called a fatigue mat to stop people getting foot fatigue. What they put down behind the bar, it's kind of just like a carpet, a glorified carpet that's waterproof, just to stop people standing on solid surfaces all the time, because it is so fatiguing and it is draining. So it is one of these things that people recognize or have spotted. So it's definitely one of those things. Yeah, where are we? Kind of.
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot of.
One actually I want to address is the one you see it a lot in. It's one of those things that comes and goes, and you see it a lot, and everyone's probably been told, is like, you have to make your hands as big as possible. So, I mean, like, stretch the gaps out between the fingers, little finger as wide as possible, thumb as wide as possible to hold a handstand. And the logic behind this is surface area. You're trying to make the biggest surface area of the hand. Where I'd argue when your fingers are stretched out to the max, can you apply effective leverage? So what we're actually trying to look at in the thing, it's not surface area, because then we could stretch our little fingers and our thumb and make them even wider and wider, is how well can I apply effective leverage to my fingers more so than anything else. So you can even try it. Like, try grab a ball, and you kind of, that's what I'm always thinking about, is like gripping something. If I grip a ball, a really big ball, so we're gripping the earth, which is a really big ball. And big disc. It's a big flat disc, depending on which school of thought you are, but for intents and purposes, it's all flat.
Mikael Christiansen, flat earth theorist.
Yeah, and that's what we're going at. And it's also like, it's one of these things that this is the kind of thing you have to realize when you're balancing with your fingers. You don't really notice it too much because you're not paying attention. The fingers learn to do it. But the fingers do different things when they're balancing. It's not the same action every single time. I notice my fingers will slide towards my palm on some balances. They'll go straight down into the floor on other ones. And they will do different things. So having a grip that allows that versus spread out, stretch completely straight, and then hoping you can kind of survive on your tendons. While it works, like, don't get me wrong, like, there's a lot of people I know who it works on. I still just
I mean, ultimately what you want is to be able to, I mean, you need to be able to generate torque from the fingers, i.e. like apply pressure, because if you don't, you won't be able to stay up for long. Like, fingerless handstand is fine, but you will fall sooner from fingerless than you will from being able to use your fingers. Yeah. So, and like, it's interesting. I had a conversation here not long ago about like how to learn the balance, like how to learn balancing. So a guy asking me like, yeah, but I get like the conditioning drills and stuff, but how do you teach people to react? And he's a hand balancer, and he said like, yeah, but like, you know, and it was interesting because he had made a lot of the same conclusions as me. Like, we haven't talked a lot about handstand training at all. And he's like, yeah, but you know, like, it doesn't really matter how your body's positioned. You just need to know how to react, he said. And we talked about this, and I said, yeah, this is basically a lot of the gist of how I've thought about things for a long time. And but he was like, how do you teach people to react? And we discussed this before too. And like in relation to the hand, it doesn't work to only just train tons of grip strength with heel pulls, but it does a lot. What you want to do, like the learning of the balance will happen by asking your brain to try to balance, right? Yeah. Like when you kick up into a handstand or you do a wall handstand and try to move to balance, you're asking your brain to try to fix this problem, to solve this thing that is going on. But what you do with heel pulls and with like strengthening the forearm is that you're giving your body the boundary conditions within which you can search for the balance more effectively. And if you ask a person just to try to handstand for 10 years with no direction, inevitably, like they will likely succeed to some degree or other. The body might just figure it out. But if you give it solid boundary conditions, i.e. conditioning of the forearms and of the shoulders and whatnot, you will allow that kind of container within which you can learn to balance more effectively. And this is where it is confusing, because it's easy to think that, oh yeah, I just need to try enough times, which is true. Or I just need to condition enough, which is also true, but like looking upon it as this kind of thing that comes together from two angles. And particularly in relation to the fingers, because in the beginning, you just need to have enough force to move your body with your fingers. And then people go, oh yeah, but you're just talking strength training. No, I'm talking about making sure your forearm has enough. And when it has enough, you use that surplus of energy to work on the task. Because if you have just enough energy to push your body back from fingers one single time before your forearm is shot, because it's literally a 1RM for your forearm, well, guess what? It's going to be tough to learn how to handstand. Whereas if you've built up this capacity to be able to do a lot, then you can use that surplus and that ability to learn to teach yourself how to balance.
Yeah. Yeah, it all just comes down to this really, when it's like, how strong are we, I suppose? And so how much, like, part of it is having the strength to do the task. The other part is... Sorry, did you lose me?
Yeah, I did lose you there. So
Shit.
We spoke at the same time, I think.
Oh well.
Happens.
Yeah. Anyway.
Go on.
That's a great question. I was just basically saying, we need the strength to do the task, but then we need the ability to repeat the task. And this is a different thing, because when it comes into the hands and everything, the hands are part of the feedback mechanism of the body. They are giving you a lot of sensation. The feet are. So you'll know, oh, once you build up this repertoire and this kind of motor map, or it's almost it's a predictive mechanism. It's like when I feel weight shift into fingertips from there, I must engage in this mechanism to recorrect the balance, to correct the task. And it's this kind of thing that's going on. It's like a perception feedback action loop. This is going on a huge amount. So basically, you're looking to have the strength to do the task, but then you're also looking to learn how to apply the strength effectively and also in a predictive manner. So it's like, I have to be able to predict my corrections of balance faster than the actual deflection of balance exceeds my ability to exert force, or extremes my strength limit to actually restore it. Or it means shift in a balance strategy. So balance strategy, straight body, go too far, use fingers, doesn't work, have to deform the body somewhere along the way to maintain center mass over base of support. Very simple. But the better you get at the predictive capacity, which is part of the sensory feedback you get from the hands and the proprioceptive feedback of the weight and its placement in the hands, the better you get at applying your strength, and the quicker you can apply your strength, which means the quicker you can correct balance, the more volatile your balance is, because it's always kind of wobbling a tiny bit, possibly imperceptibly to the outside eye. But the less strength you have to use and the less durational effort of the strength you have to use. So we can see this in beginner. Someone loses balance, they're losing to overbalance. They squeeze fingers, they've got enough strength to go. It stops, and then it takes about a second and a half of sustained contraction to actually move the center mass and move the shape back into the balance position. Whereas someone who can hold a handstand, it's like, oh, balance gone, quick pulse of the fingers for, 0.2 of a second, and balance is maintained. Yeah. Oh, balance is lost in the other direction, quick pulse the other direction. And this is what's going on. So it is these kind of balance strategies that get taught of the hand and the predictions of the hand as well.
Yeah, and I mean, like, ultimately, your shoulder is like almost immobile, and it's just slight finger twitching that does everything. And this is like why working with an elevated shoulder position is effective, because like you, in an elevated shoulder position, you just put your shoulder in a certain place and you lock the pressure there. It doesn't go up, it doesn't go down, it just stays there. And then you work in the fingers, compared to if you would have like a kind of quote unquote looser shoulder position, or not be comfortable or strong enough to keep your shoulder in your chosen fixed state, because then you would like have a lot more movement back and forth. So the elevated position there is an effective one in terms of the understanding of what to do, because it's a simple cue. You push from there. Like, that's why we talk about the trapezius, because it's tangible and easy to feel. Okay, yeah, the trapezius is tense, I feel it on the side of my neck. The trapezius is not tense, I feel that nothing is tensing on the side of my neck. And this could also be done in kind of the arched old school handstand. Okay, I feel the pressure in my deltoids and I'm keeping it on that pressure. It's all relative to where you place your body and where you have that pressure, and then kind of the micro corrections happen from the hand, in the same way as like if your hips are really stable, like the correction from your foot will be very simple. Whereas if your hips were not stable, and then the correction from the foot would be a lot larger. So it's, ideally speaking, in a perfect world, it doesn't exist, or it might exist for a couple of seconds here and there while you're balancing. You are in that perfect state, but you will be traveling around it, and you will be entering and exiting this kind of nice space where only the hand does things. And again, the more fatigue you get, the more like this starts to travel, the waves get larger, and you kind of you need to deal with things in other areas of your body as well.
Yeah, that basically sums up a lot of these things. Mm-hmm. I'd like to move on to some of the questions, actually, because we're going to touch on a few of them just to give them their due diligence. Mm-hmm. So we have a question from Frederico. Hi, Emmet and Mikael. I have a question about hand width in handstand. I found that if I keep them quite wide, index finger in line with the edge of the shoulder, I'm in a very comfortable and stable position where the shoulders feel like they're locked in place, not too much shrugged nor depressed, and even when I shift to fingertips, it's really comfortable. But because I like even the look of the closer hands, I've tried it, and if I place them right underneath shoulders, I find myself stacking much more. Cannot externally rotate that much, and everything feels harder. Do you have any thoughts about this? Thank you for going, because this podcast is the best I've heard this year. Thank you, Federico. We enjoy the podcast too. We enjoy doing it. So basically, there's kind of an interesting thing I wanted to touch on as well with the handstand width. Depending, if we were to like look at your handstand and look at the line the arms are making, they could almost be parallel, or when they go wider, they start to make a triangle. And what we know about a triangle and these kind of polygon forces is if we take a polygon plane, just the plane picture of the thing, is it will converge at a point, and this will distribute points downward. This will also in line with it will split some of the force into a horizontal vector and some of it into a vertical vector. But this will mean that if you think about, like, it's almost like a pincer, it's almost like two things are squeezing at one point together. And that will mean some of your elevation force is reduced because it's been translated. It's using the horizontal moment arm of the arms. So it goes back to maybe the lateral stability and the lateral forces you're getting from the floor friction is actually helping to elevate the shoulders. So this is why you can actually feel like this. Now, it's one of these things, like you say, it's like, it feels really comfortable and I really enjoy it and it's working. That's great. But then you're like, oh, I prefer the aesthetics of something else. Well, if you prefer an aesthetic of something, and people do this in circus all the time, it's like, I prefer how something looks because it's an art and we have to make choices about how we want our art to look. And then that means sometimes the technique will be inefficient because of the way of the look you want. Mm. So I think it's kind of one of the things you have to kind of make a choice. It's like, if you prefer this narrow look and that's what you want, and that's how your handstand wants to look, then you'll have to redefine your technique and spend some time refining it and working out the specifics of that aesthetic. Whereas if you're like, oh, I prefer the other one, it feels better and works better in your body. It's like, well, maybe if you're doing the sport of handstands versus the art and aesthetic of handstand, maybe that would be the better one to pick as well.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, to me, this sounds a little bit like like an aesthetical question, and like you're already. I mean, it seems at least you're asking yourself the right questions. I would like to do it like this, and then you're having the specific sensations in relation to that. Then I mean, yeah, if you want to have a narrower handstand, then work on it. In terms of the external rotation stuff, I mean, as long as you feel strong and stable in the position, and particularly if you can shift to a fingertip position and your alignment is all right, it's highly likely that your external rotation is fine. It's the external rotation is important, but it's one of these things that I think people have a tendency to oversensitize in the sense of like feeling for it too much. Like, if you feel that your shoulder is strong and stable and it's pushed up, it's likely that you're not internally rotating your arm, which is what externally rotating the arm actually is about, at least in my perspective.
Yeah. Yeah, so once again, it comes down to exploration and preference more so than anything else. This is one we've both gotten a lot of times. Actually, the next question is, does hanging grip strength training carry over to handstand finger strength for overbalance?
Oh boy, do I have things to say on this.
I knew you did.
It might have, but I can remember right off the top of my head right now, 2 rope climbers. We're talking circus artist rope climbers. These 2 girls that I know, and they're both monsters in the rope. We are talking people who can do like a swing to a full twist where they release the rope, grab it back, and catch themselves without falling down. Like, I am sure that if I would do a hanging contest in a rope with them hanging from one arm, they would murder me. Same if I would hang from a bar, they would absolutely destroy me. No chance that I could hang as long as them whatsoever. Like, and yet when I put them into a handstand and had them try to balance, like they said, oh yeah, I'd like to try to handstand, but like I struggle so much with the balance, blah, blah. And I checked this because I assumed that, okay, yeah, but their finger pressure must be good. Let's just try to have them do some kind of heel pull thing to feel their finger pressure. And I put her into like a little bit of an overbalance, just, okay, now apply pressure with the fingers, I say. And her alignment was decent and nothing happens. And I'm like, yeah, but push with the fingers. Try to like really grip the floor. I was like, I'm doing it. And I let her go down. And I was like, okay, yeah, you need to do specific conditioning for the pressure on the floor in handstand with the fingers. And it was just very fascinating to me because my assumption was just so clear that, okay, but this girl can literally just crush stuff with her hand. And yet this pressure on the floor in this particular situation, she cannot. And we're not talking about the balancing aspect of reactivity. We're talking about the like her doing maximal pressure on the floor could not move enough of her body weight to, again, have this container within she could balance. So this leads me, again, as in many other strength-related situations, to move closer to the belief that strength is highly context-specific and dependent. So, I mean, her being able to do that one incredibly strong grip feat does not necessarily translate over to the other because joint angles are different, muscle pressure is different, and ultimately it's brain activity. The brain doesn't know how to do this certain thing, and hence it might need to learn so. And you'll find situations where people have great grip strength that just carries over quickly. And I've seen this a lot from people that lift weights and just have done like loads of bicep curls and like loads of that stuff. Okay, they just have like big burly forearms, and then they're able to utilize that to some degree, but like it doesn't necessarily carry over. It might, but yeah,
this is one of those things. I think grip is one of the most context specific strength. If we just look at all, like, even if you just go into a strength training, grip training, you have all these different categories: pinch grip and hub grip and bars, tick bars and all this. And it's very common to find like people who are like immense pinch grip but can't handle tick bars and stuff like this. So it's having a good base of strength overall in your forearms is good. Handstand has a very specific grip and a very specific wrist position and very specific everything. So it's not necessarily a transfer, but it might mean that your pathway to your general physical preparation, once it catches up with your specific stuff, will go quicker. But it is one of those things, I think it's not a direct one-to-one comparison. So getting grip training is good. Getting stronger is good. Hanging from bars is good. Will it make your handstand necessarily immediately better? No. But does it give potential for possible improvements in the future? Maybe. It's probably the easiest way to think about it. Yeah. Yeah, I can definitely think of a few people. I can remember when the one-arm hangs were going around. There was a few people I knew who were working up like 2-3 minute one-arm hangs and their handstands were just dying because their forearms would die at 20-30 seconds. So they weren't trained, they weren't hand balanced, but it was still, they could get 20-30 seconds, but then suffered forearm death. That was kind of amazing to me. It was like you can literally hang for 6 minutes on a bar, going 3 minutes one side, 3 minutes the other side, and still only die after 30 seconds on a handstand. So it is very context specific.
Yeah, exactly. So
To do rotation of the hands. I practice with my index finger at 12 o'clock. Bearing in mind, my major challenge is getting out of a banana with more elevation and external rotation of the shoulders. Would changing the rotation of the hands help? Maybe. It also depends on how long you're balancing for, is one of the questions I would be interested to go for. What is the general flexibility of the shoulder? It's these kind of things can lead into it. It can work trying. I do remember actually just one case in particular of one of the girls in circus school who was ultra flexible, great bridge, great shoulders, pretty strong, done aerial, could hold a handstand, but whenever she was on the floor, it was just banana, and there's like literally nothing she could do to straighten it out. The second you put her on a set of parallettes, bam, like textbook straight handstand. I think I mentioned this. And it was just very weird to see because like it was an instantaneous change in response to the parallettes. And it wasn't like blocks. If their fingers were forward, banana. Fingers to the side, textbook. So I'm going to say it's worth trying just based on an n=1 example of something I've seen. Would it work for you? I can't guarantee it. But once again, try and find out.
Yeah, like in general, like based on like the very little information we have from that question, like I wouldn't immediately put any trust in like the change of the hand position, because like you can change hand position by simply rotating your forearm, but you can also change hand position by actually rotating in your shoulder. So it depends a little bit on what's going on there, and most of the time the arching and kind of the back related things come more down to shoulders. But yeah, it's definitely something to try. But again, you are like, unless there is a specific kind of anatomical thing that makes it impossible for a person to do a certain type of position, which we can never know anyway without like opening up the body. With training, you are likely able to do a reasonably good handstand with good form, with a number of different hand positions and and rotations of the forearm and finger position and so on. Because it'll just come down to, okay, now I'm going to put my fingers like this, and now I'm going to put my fingers like that, in the same way as you can stand on your foot on various strange ways at the point when you're actually good enough or have good enough control to do so. But you want to have your default, which is the one you ask no questions about when you put a hand on the floor, and finding this one I think is definitely the most relevant. And this might also, as we talked about, change over time. Like I've actually found that like when I do one arms on my left arm lately, I've found that, hey, I have a thumb. I can pressure on the floor with the thumb. I've never really pressured on the floor with the thumb much before. And on my right, I don't, because the positioning on my right arm, they look identical. But when I push with the thumb on the ground on the right arm, it slides inwards and it doesn't really do much. While on the left arm, it kind of applies a little bit of pressure on the ground. So again, like this is one body with two hands that have done more or less the same thing for 10 years, but still, like they have different habits.
Yeah. Yes. It's always interesting, these kind of things. I think it's that kind of thing, just on that point, it's like the body looks symmetric from the outside. Internally, the body is not symmetric based on all our organs and everything. And like on the brain has functions that are lateralized to different things, and different sides of the bodies are better at different things, and dominant hands are better at different things as well. So it is just kind of possible or normal, I suppose, that different sides of the bodies will have different strategies based on how they're actually wired.
Yeah.
Cool. And our last question for today, we kind of touched on this one already, but Might as well do it again. My hands have a tendency to go into pyramid grip when doing the Y thing and in some poses. I tried to fix this as it's considered bad. I tried a little in handstand after discovering it was a real thing recognized by the Federation, and it seems better, easier to balance. I'm still a beginner, freestanding for a couple of seconds at most. Should I spend time working on the pyramid or continue with a more traditional grip? Is it more likely to cause problems long term because of the weight being carried on a smaller area? My experience would say no. You should keep working whatever works for you. I would say at the beginner stage, the best thing to do is to spend some time trying something out for a while and then try something else out for a while. And when I say a while, I mean a month or two, just to get used to the change and just to see what works for you and just have a comparison. Because if you're still at the stage of thing, you're still learning. And what might seem good at a short term can be not good for you in the long term. I'm not talking injury-wise. I'm just talking might just limit potential or this kind of thing. And as your technique and control gets better, you might find you prefer something else. So that would be my take on it.
I mean, yeah. If you talk pyramid grip, as in like hands turned inwards and rather close to each other.
I think he's talking the claw.
The claw. Oh, okay, yeah. Okay, that thing. Yeah, then I think you're fine. It's just like it would be interesting to do the impossible, basically, just like having a large sample size of hands getting X-rayed or whatnot, so you could make some sort of correlation aspect in terms of blah 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 joint angles and bone and all that. But like these things have too many variables for us to safely know anything whatsoever. So they're basically just not worth looking into, because like you cannot make the sample size. And I mean, I don't have enough dead bodies in my basement to know.
We can help you fix that if you want. But dead corpse storage.
Yeah, you just need to apply pressure on the floor with your hands and stand on them and have fun with that. And, that's pretty much as it's worth saying about it, I think.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those things, like even if just to sort of wrap up, it's like comparing hand size like from person to person can be unreal. Like we had a friend of ours a while ago and she's the same height as my girlfriend. We're comparing her hand size to my girlfriend's hand size, and I think the hand size is like she was tall. They're about like 175, 176. And the other girl, her hands were like about 2 centimeters smaller on the fingers than the thing. And it's the same with like finger length and palm size. Like my palms are pretty big, but my fingers are pretty stumpy. So I have like basically an equal ratio of fingers to palm. Whereas other people would have like less palm and more finger relative and these kind of things. So yeah, there's a lot of variance in there, even though you might be going, I'm the same size person as this. It's like, well, your height is the same, but maybe everything else isn't.
Yep.
And I suppose that's why you have to try these things out.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
Yeah, I think we'll wrap up there.
Yes.
The Handstandcast is brought to you by Handstand Factory and is produced by Motion Impulse. Thanks for tuning in. You can find a full transcript of each episode along with the show notes and any relevant references on handstandfactory.com/podcast. Thanks to Isaac for editing and Jordan for transcriptions. Music by Daniel Horwath. If you want to support the show, you can buy us a coffee on buymeacoffee.com or consider starting one of our Handstand Factory online programs. Links are in the show notes.